So welcome everyone to this week's IVI Coffee and Talk. As you know, we've opened these up to external researchers, external to the IVI as well this year. So this week we're delighted to have Dr. Umair Hassan, one of our colleagues in the School of Business here in Maynooth University. And Umair is going to speak to us today about data spaces within the European perspective. So Umair, I'll hand over to you. Oh, you're just on mute there.
Okay, thank you, Grace. Thanks a lot for the
perfect
introduction. So can you hear me, all of you, and can you see the slides, just to confirm?
Yeah, all good.
Okay, perfect. So I think before I start, I need to introduce myself in a bit more detail. So I'm aware I am in the School of Business, mostly looking at information systems. So before joining Maynooth, I was a research fellow in IVI Coffee&Talk, where I also did my PhD in Insight Center for Data Analytics. So I was associated with Insight Center for Data Analytics since 2010. And I mostly work around data management, crowdsourcing, collecting intelligence, and these kind of things. And I worked on a few EU projects around transport analytics, water analytics, and big data value systems. So today's talk is about data spaces. What I'll do is essentially I'll give a bit of background about data spaces and then introduce some of the work what we have done, and also then from European Union perspective and European Commission perspective, what are the different things that are happening, and if we see any value in contributing to those initiatives. So to give you a bit of background, so we know that in general, in organizations and across multiple organizations, there is always this need of integrating data and using that data for different purposes. So that could be for business value purposes, or it could be policy purposes, or any consumer activity or consumer products purposes. So what generally we have is that if you think of it from organization perspective, we have a bunch of data sources. So when I say data sources, I mean one database, or you can also think of it as one information system, which holds one type of information or one type of database. So in organizations, especially large organizations, we have a multiple number of databases or data sources. And as the number of data sources increases, the number of entities stored in those databases and attributes increase. So we have the typical long tail of data variety in big data. And what we have is that a few of those databases or data sources are used a lot for operational purposes. And then all the other sources are used occasionally, depending on the use case for whatever reason we are extracting information from those data sources. So what happens is that the more data sources we are integrating, there's a cost of integration, both in terms of syntactic details, also semantics of the database. And it increases as the number of data sources, entities that we use to so typically, if you think of, let's say, our data warehousing project, it can take years to actually implement, and even more years to actually properly use that kind of data warehousing project. So people now have started talking about a data lake, which can contain multiple sorts of information instead of just focusing on one type of, let's say, a relational database or something like that. So around that topic, there was also a discussion in computer science and information systems area about a best effort or approximate approaches to integration, where you don't have to upfront spend a lot of time in terms of integrating information. Instead, you only integrate data sources that are required for a one particular purpose, and you follow this approach. So this concept of moving away from databases to data spaces was coined around 2005, 2006 by few researchers in Google. So Michael J. Franklin, he's one of the top researchers in semantic web, and also Anon Levy, who's well-known founder of Google data tables. So those people, they propose this concept of data spaces, where you provide a core set of services in an organization around its integration of its data sources. So in this figure, we can see that there are, let's say, 4 different databases or 5 different databases. Some of those are relational databases. So RDB is a relational database. Then we have other sources, which includes different formats, like information stored in resource description format or XML format. So essentially what we are saying here is that information is stored in heterogeneous formats, heterogeneous schemas, heterogeneous types of entities. So if someone within our organization wants to use that information and map those different sources in terms of their schema, their semantics, what they need is a core set of services to support that. So first of all is the catalog service. So that catalog service will essentially store information about all the different sources of data. It will describe those data sources. It will describe its access rules. It will describe its schema. Then you can also have a kind of like a search index that spans across different data sources. Besides these 2 or 3 core services that are used by developers, you can also have administration and enhancement and discovery services. So enhancement service will enable you to, let's say, match different entities in different data sources. So essentially, these 4 or 5 kind of enterprise-wide services will support the complete data space that resides in Varga organization. So let's say if we talk about Google, it will say all the data sources within Google would map to one data space, and Google will provide internally all of these services for its developers, users, all kind of data users to use those services to, first of all, discover data sources, then to integrate them when needed, and enhance them when they needed. So based on this concept, the data spaces paradigm was born around 2005. So building on these kind of this paradigm, we worked on a project called water economics. It was an FP7 project around water analytics. So what we were doing with that project was looking at how different water sensors produce information, and how we can integrate those with daily activities of water users to create a data space that can then be used by developers or end users to create interesting applications. We developed those services, the catalog, access control, and search and query services for 3 or 4 different use cases. So one of those was a airport. So we had Lenati Airport in Italy helping us. We had some municipal cities in Greece, and we also had some schools in Ireland as well. So we tested out this approach on different scenarios, and building on the existing approach of data spaces, we also built a real-time data collection and services layer on top of that. And we published some paper on that around the topic of data spaces, how they could be built, how they could be used, what are the different challenges. Now, essentially the difference between a data space and a database is in terms of model. So a data space has multiple data representation models as for a single database. The number of formats are heterogeneous. The control is partial as opposed to the complete control on a single database. And the query mechanisms are approximate instead of that. So, for instance, in a database, you might have SQL queries that respond once to your questions, but in case of in the case of, let's say, a database, you might have simple keyword search or simple keyword queries like you have on a search engine. And most of the information processing is distributed or network as compared to a single database. So we worked on this project, the water analytics project, and besides that, we had a few projects around big data. So there were two projects which were FP7. The first one was Big Data Public-Private Forum, and the second one was PIPE. So Big Data Public-Private Forum was mainly on how to place big data in the overall European ecosystem, what are the challenges, and then PIPE built on that project and looked at the societal impacts of big data from European perspective. And following on that, there was this project, which is, I think, close to completion now. It's Big Data Value Ecosystem. That project has led to kind of like the calls that are coming in now in terms of European data spaces and the push for creating data spaces. And the Big Data Value Association, we were part of that. I was part of that with NYG. And they were primarily looking at how big data can benefit in different sectors and what are the challenges that are sector specific. For that, we created 3-year documents, which is strategic research initiative document. And those led to this PPP, the Public-Private Partnership of Big Data Value Association. So now they are quite active in terms of topics around big data. They are also pushing for things around here. So based on this kind of history, what we have now is there is this call of creation of big data ecosystem or data ecosystem around Europe. And the main focus is to have a joint, let's say, data single market, which allows free flow of information, which allows appropriate data access rules, data privacy guarantees, and it also focuses on defining the concept of data spaces around different sectors. So essentially what European Union is saying is that they will create sector-specific data spaces that will span across countries, across companies, and across different technologies. So the common European data spaces for now, what they have proposed is around 9 different sectors. And if you see, they kind of like match towards the clusters that are defined in IVI as well at some level. So the projects around these data spaces are now open for submissions. Some of those are very, let's say, industry oriented, especially if you look at Digital Europe program. So they are looking at industry participation in creation of these data spaces, the development of the European Information Board. And then there are Horizon Europe topics around as well that require some kind of alignment between different projects on these sector specific or common European data spaces. So what I wanted to kind of like have a bit of discussion around this talk was what do we think about this European common data spaces and how we can possibly benefit from and contribute to these initiatives that are coming down the line in this year, next year, even years after. So now I suppose that was the quick overview or quick talk that I wanted to present. It's open for discussion. What do you think?
So the floor is open for any questions, any comments there for Umair after that presentation. Thanks, Umair, for a really interesting presentation.
No.
Yeah, Fabiano?
Yeah, hi, Umair. Hi, every one of you. I think it was a very interesting presentation. Thanks. It's it's a bit of time in the next year or two that I'm looking at data space with a quite, a sort of mixed feeling. The first comment I have is, how do you decide when to go to from a sort of normal database approach to something like a data space? And then the second question is, what are the infrastructure that are available to facilitate this transition? Because I found in the literature also on the data repository that is quite scattered. There are not real way to start in a sort of creating a small prototype and moving forward. That's maybe something that would be nice to address. Thanks. What's your experience and how can we solve it?
Okay, thanks a lot, Fabiano. It's very interesting, both questions. So the first question was about when do you move from database to a data space? So conceptually, I think it's like big data. It's a big term that is used to describe a high-level paradigm and say that fits a lot of things when you say data spaces. But from my perspective, it's essentially a data space is a collection of heterogeneous databases. So you do not necessarily move away from a data space to from a database to a data space. At organization level, you already have a data space. So if you, let's say, if you take Manuch University, it has few systems. It has Moodle, it has HR system, it has RIS system. Each of that has at the back a database. So a data space already exists in Manuch University. It's that how it's integrated, how data is made available. So currently, the data is mostly available through each system's or user interface, right? If you want to access any information on Moodle, you have to go through Moodle's user interface. So let's assume that for all the databases that exist in Manuch University, we create a catalog. We expose all those databases as APIs. So direct access to data instead of allowing access through the user interface that is built for one information system. We allow access to databases of all information systems using APIs. So direct access, which is programmable access. And we set rules around those access. So that does not mean if, let's say, Moodle data is available as an API, that doesn't mean everyone can access that, but we set rules around that. But those rules are known to everyone who can access what data at what level. So this is what is needed in terms of implementation of data space. First of all, making each information systems database available through programmable interface. And secondly, build a service, which is either a catalog or a search or a discovery service that allows people to look for data and to understand that data and to know how to programmatically access that data. So that's something that becomes a database, and those kind of services, the catalog, the search, the discovery, the administration service, those are the main candidates that need to be implemented. If you think of, let's say, catalogs, the CCAN catalog is used a lot in a lot of these country-wide, let's say, the data catalogs. So for example, if you look at data.gov.ie, that's a catalog of all the data sources that are providing public information in Ireland, right? So you can think of that data.gov.ie, that catalog, as a service that provides Ireland's public data space. It defines Ireland's public data space for now. So from the common data spaces that Europe is proposing, it's at a bigger level than a country. So we started from Maynooth with the organization, then we landed at Ireland level, for which we have a catalog, which is data.gov.ie. Now think of it at Europe level. If for all the agriculture data sources, we have a catalog or a distributed catalog or set of catalogs that define those data sources, and they also define rules around that. So that becomes a common, let's say, agriculture data space. And interestingly, yesterday, the Data Act was actually published by European Union, which sets rules around that. So in terms of data space, it's not only about, let's say, technology, it's also about the legislative rules around that. And those acts are now becoming in force. In some of those are already published, some of those are in proposals. I hope I've answered some of your questions.
Yes, you did indeed, and you know, it would be nice to follow up. I come in the next room after that. You know?
Okay. Okay. So thanks. Any questions? Any other comments, questions? Any confusion?
Maybe I can ask a question.
Sure.
Umair, yeah. Thanks, Umair, for your interesting presentation. I was just wondering, like, do you think like data warehouse could be an example, or we can like position data warehouse within the data spaces, or if we can use some tools to creating these data spaces, like some ETL tools are available. So just wanted your opinion. What do you think? Where can we place or position the data warehouse? And
Okay.
even if it is, whether it is different from data spaces, just your opinion on that.
Okay, so a data warehouse, so it's conceptually to me is a database.
Mm-hmm.
So I worked with a telecom company and we built a data warehouse there for Teradata. So essentially what data warehouse is, it takes information from multiple information systems. So if you think of, let's say, a telecom company, it will take information from its networks, its billing systems, all of that. It will clean those, it will clean that information and dump into a very large database, which could be distributed in itself. But essentially, it's creating a new database, which represents a copy of information in a lot of information systems. So if I see from data space perspective, data space will consist of those original information systems plus this data warehouse. So for an organization, so a telecom company, its data space will span its original sources plus new data warehouse. So you can use the tools, for example, the ETL tools that are used for integration to help with integration of sources for other purposes, or creating new data warehouses, or creating new data lakes. So now the industry term is to use data lake instead of data warehouses, where you have multiple types of information. But essentially, you are dumping information from a lot of sources into one place. So from my perspective, a data space is again, it's a collection of all those databases. No matter how new databases, how many more databases you create, your data space still remains it is defined over all of those data sources. And from organization perspective, the catalog defines which data source is part of the database and which is not, because it defines the type of information stored in each database. Okay? So for me, the data space is at a higher level than a data warehouse.
So you mean like if the data which is available before processing and after processing, we consider that as a whole, a single unit, and we can put that together in the data space zone.
Yeah, so data space, so data warehouse is a specific technology, right? It's a database, but data space is not one technology. It's a kind of like an administrative boundary.
Oh, okay.
So data space is implemented using multiple technologies.
Okay. Got it. Yeah. Thanks, Umair. Thanks very much.
No problem.
May I proceed?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Thank you very much, Umair, for the interesting talk. No doubt these data spaces are being used across domains and industries, which basically can use them to create more data spaces. And the building blocks which are part of building the data spaces could be the interoperability, trust, value creation based on the data, and it could be the governance of the data space. So I was just wondering if these building blocks are already in place, or they are still working on it, or what is the current state of the art in this regard?
Okay, so in terms of state of the art, it's an open field, especially now because of the data protection thing. So the work is done from different perspectives. One is purely technology perspective, right? So when you talk about interoperability, the goal is to create standards. So Europe is pushing for a lot of standards in a lot of domains. To give you an example of healthcare, the EHR standard is kind of like the main goal there. And even within that, let's say now there are proposals that are asking for privacy ensuring computation which is distributed, multi-party computation. So that is kind of a recent topic which is becoming quite popular now. Then there is this data portability concept that you should be able to move your data from one country to another. So for instance, if I'm a patient in Ireland, I should be able to move my data to Spain if I'm there to share about my history, things like that. So all these, it is kind of like open field now. That's why I raised this issue here, because it's a good time to place yourself in those areas. These are pure technical areas. But then there are legislative areas, how to agree on rules, who gets access, who doesn't get access, how to share data between business to government, government to business, or business to business, business to customer. All these rules, they are being set now. So one can contribute there as well. And then the question is how companies will integrate into this, because this data altruism or making data available, it's a difficult thing to digest for companies. But Europe as a whole is pushing for that. So there are a lot of areas we can contribute.
All right. Thank you very much. Yeah, definitely it's a newborn thing, and we can contribute a lot into this. Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think we'll wrap up there. It's 2 o'clock now. Thanks again, Umair, for a really great presentation and discussion. And thanks everyone for attending today. Just to highlight that we have Dr. Marco Alfano from IVI presenting in our Coffee and Talk session next week. Up on screen are the various ways you can keep in touch with us and any of our events. And next Thursday, we will also be having our first IVI webinar of 2022 at 3. And this will be centered around enterprise architecture and how it can be used to design digital transformation. So we look forward to seeing you all at future events. And thanks again, Umair, for the session today.
Thank you for the opportunity.